The morning after the night before, and we're trying again with the new camera, so hopefully this works and you're getting a slightly better picture quality coming through. In this video we're going to discuss Vasyl Lomachenko versus Hughie Linares, and we might discuss a bit about the Hughie Fury post-fight interview where it was discussed that they were going to vacate the British title. Initial post-fight reaction to Hughie Fury versus Sexton went up last night. As is always the way, I record these things immediately after the final bell, so didn't have the chance to listen to the post-fight interview at the time of uploading. Sometimes these post-fight interviews are as interesting and as revealing as the fight itself. Potentially last night was one of those occasions, so maybe we will touch on that in the second half of this video. Let's start with Vasyl Lomachenko versus Hughie Linares. I didn't specifically make a pre-fight prediction video for this. My sort of general thoughts were is that Lomachenko was a favourite in the fight. I expected him to win. I thought he was the more likely winner. But I did feel that Linares was a good fighter, and I did feel that the change in weight classes would make a difference for Vasyl Lomachenko. Lomachenko's last opponent was Guillermo Redondo. This is a small super bantamweight or a bantamweight, depending on how you're looking at it. And he's gone straight from fighting someone at that size to fighting someone of Hughie Linares' size, who is not only a big lightweight, but by all accounts, was something like a welterweight or a light middleweight by the time the fight actually took place last night. So, the visual impression of seeing the two guys standing up against each other, Linares, a much taller, scopier, rangier individual, just looked a lot physically bigger, looks a lot physically stronger, however you want to phrase it. So, first and foremost, you've got to give props to Vasyl Lomachenko for taking the fight. You've got to give props for him to stepping up to lightweight. Clearly Lomachenko is not a guy who's outgrown the division that he was operating in. He's small for that division, if you ask me. So this was a case of Lomachenko, to use that awful phrase, daring to be great. This is a case of Lomachenko fighting someone in a division where he doesn't really have to fight at, because he's looking to make the bigger fights, looking to build a legacy. So you've got to give him some praise for that. When I woke up this morning, because I wasn't able to stay up for the fight, when I woke up this morning, I saw two different reactions to how this fight played out. And they were strong reactions. One of them was that the fight was very competitive. The scorecards were relatively even. I think one of the judges had Hughie up at the time of the stoppage. One of them had it a draw. One of them had Lomachenko up by 1 or 2. Obviously, Lomachenko got dropped in the fight. He got caught clean by Hughie Linares. I saw people talking about the fact that Lomachenko was taking more punches than they'd seen him take in previous fights. And I think when I first looked at the reaction without watching the fight, it sounded like Lomachenko had won the fight, but it was a fight where he'd been asked some difficult questions. It's a fight where he'd had 1 or 2 shaky moments, and it was a fight that was on the whole competitive, other than the stoppage. I was actually quite surprised when I sat down to watch the fight, because that's not how I see it. Now, granted, the first few rounds were competitive, but they were competitive because it was tentative. They were competitive because it wasn't, really heated up boxing in there. So I don't think it was like both guys fighting to their max, cancelling each other out. I just think it was early rounds when the guys were working into it. For me, middle rounds, Lomachenko starts to take over. And I had Lomachenko. I can't tell you I scored the fight with an exact number of rounds, but my overriding impression, having watched it, is that Lomachenko was ahead. And I didn't really see it that Hughie Linares was up in the fight, or that Hughie Linares was equal in the fight. Now, granted, Linares does kind of time Lomachenko, around 6, with a great straight punch right down the pipe. Catches Lomachenko clean, and the smaller man is sent to the canvas. I've seen different reactions to that knockdown. Some people saying it was some sort of flash knockdown. Some people saying that he was hurt and wobbled. My take is he got hit clean by a much bigger guy. He got hit square in the jaw, for want of a better term, and it was a fantastically timed and fantastically executed punch by Jorge Linares that sent Lomachenko down. I've got to be consistent. I've said before on this channel, when someone goes down and they're able to get back up again and fight on relatively swiftly without looking like they're in a world of trouble, for me, that's in many ways a sign of a good chin. And when you add in the size difference here, that sort of increases the validity behind that point for me. I think Linares could have done more to press home the advantage after that knockdown. I certainly think Linares, when the plan was failing, Linares could have done more to try and use his size. I appreciate he's not that kind of fighter. He's more of a boxer himself. But when the boxing was going south, maybe he could have tried to make it a bit more physical in there. But overall, Lomachenko got hit clean. He got dropped. He got back up again. He didn't look like getting stopped. Obviously he was a bit wobbled. He went down, but he didn't look like he was drunk. He knew where he was, and he was able to quickly regain his place in the fight. That's my take. So I don't massively read too much into that knockdown. I don't use that as a way of trying to take away from Lomachenko in this fight. What I will say is, clearly he's operating in divisions now where the men are substantially bigger. The fight that everyone's talking about is Lomachenko-Mikey Garcia. Mikey Garcia is an even bigger guy. Mikey Garcia is a guy who's been campaigning at the weight class above, beating guys like Adrian Broner, who have been campaigning regularly at the weight class above that. And Mikey Garcia has talked about wanting to walk through 147. So, Garcia's an even bigger guy. Garcia hits even harder. Garcia probably is a more physical specimen than Jorge Linares as well. Again, Garcia's another sort of ABC boxer, if you like, in terms of his approach to the game. But, there gets a point where too big a size gap is relevant. It doesn't matter how good a fighter you are. If you stop one of the top super middles or the top light heavies in with heavyweights, they're going to get knocked out because the size is just too big a factor. And Lomachenko obviously showed that he was capable of dealing with a much, much bigger man at lightweight. But, just because he's proven that last night, that doesn't make me think I want to see Lomachenko at light welter, or Lomachenko fighting guys who are, natural 140 pounders at this stage of their career. Look, from a spectacle perspective, I'd love to see Lomachenko-Mikey Garcia. I think it's an enthralling fight. I do pick Mikey in the fight on grounds of the fact, I think Lomachenko's probably, they're both elite level technicians. They are. I think Lomachenko's probably got more bells and whistles to his game than Mikey does. I think Lomachenko's probably got more next level skills. Mikey I see as more classic in his approach. But I do think it gets to a point where, size and power is so relevant. Because Lomachenko was taking punches last night. And, as the old phrase goes, if you're running through the rain, you better expect to get wet, And I guess Lomachenko was in a fight against an elite fighter and he got hit. You can't complain about that. But Lomachenko was taking punches last night from a much bigger man. You just wonder if it will get to the point where someone like Mikey will just be too big and too good, So for me, I kind of, whilst from a spectacle perspective, I'd love to see Lomachenko versus Mikey Garcia or Terence Crawford. Of course, we'd all be watching it. I kind of feel that he doesn't need to go down that route. I still feel there's relevant names in and around the weight divisions that he should legitimately be operating at, featherweight, super featherweight, before he's got to start considering the higher weight classes. I know he said he wants to stay at 135, and I know Mikey can make 135 apparently, but the size difference between the two of them is going to be very, very substantial. A lot of people have different opinions on Jorge Linares. Some people think Jorge Linares is a pound for pound fighter. Some people think he's, one above Anthony Crolla. It depends how you look at it. My take, Jorge Linares doesn't have the superstar names on his resume. And yes, Jorge Linares did have some career setbacks historically earlier on in his career. I do think Linares has been overhyped somewhat by the Sky commentary teams when he's been fighting UK prospects. I've heard people say things like one of the greatest fighters to come to Britain, top pound for pound fighter, one of the greatest world champions currently active in the sport. You'll never have seen me put Jorge Linares in a top 10 pound for pound list on this channel. But I do think Jorge Linares, in the absence of Mikey Garcia, is the consensus number one at lightweight. His wins over Cruller, Mitchell, Luke Campbell, even though some of those fights were very competitive, but his wins over some of them were impressive. He's shown that he can go 12 rounds in fights. He's shown that he does have a level of power. His skills, to me, are impressive. His boxing pedigree, is impressive. And, I give Lomachenko real credit. And for my money, where does Lomachenko stand today? Lomachenko does stand for me as the pound for pound number one in the sport. I haven't always been on the Lomachenko hype train. Early on in his career, I was possibly overcritical in hindsight after the loss to Salido. More recently, I've said names like Terence Crawford I'd have above Lomachenko. But for me, Lomachenko, the way he's gone through these weight classes, some of the names he's beaten in such a young professional career. I mean, just think that Nicholas Walters, Gary Russell Jr., obviously Jorge Linares now, Guillermo Rigondo. This list of names is getting stronger fight by fight. And, Terence Crawford has obviously stepped through the business himself. Terence Crawford has unified titles himself, but I don't see Crawford's best wins as strong as Lomachenko's at this stage. I think Crawford, if he goes and fights Keith Thurman and Errol Spence, he's got the potential to overtake again, perhaps. But right now, I go Lomachenko 1, Crawford 2. That's my take on it. Both extremely impressive fighters, both guys who are great to watch. Both great boxers. But for me, Lomachenko, he deserves a lot of credit for taking this fight and a lot of credit for his performance in the fight and for forcing the stoppage against a guy like Jorge Linares. Look, people talking about the stoppage, I don't think Jorge Linares probably appreciated how close the fight was on the scorecards. I certainly didn't watching it. I thought Lomachenko was up. And I think Lomachenko is a frustrating guy to fight. And I think Linares was hurt by that punch. Lomachenko isn't the biggest puncher in the world, but the timing of that punch, the accuracy of that punch, the speed of that punch, precision body shot, bent Linares in half, folded him like a deck chair, had him on his knees. Look, could he have got up and made the count to save his life? He probably could have done, yes. But I think that punch took the will away from him and, got him to stay down in the fight. And Lomachenko has this run of making people quit. And I think it's just relating to how frustrating it is to fight him, For me in this fight, Lomachenko was just one step ahead. Linares was doing a lot of good stuff in there. He was catching Lomachenko with some good work. He was boxing well. It's not like Linares fell to pieces. But Lomachenko, you just kind of got the impression watching it. He was always that 1% sharper. Linares would throw a punch, somehow it would miss, and Lomachenko would just be timing one back. And it's that timing. Lomachenko's timing for me is some of the best you'll see in the sport. You just got the impression that he was one step ahead. And I think when you're in with a guy like that, it must be so demoralising round after round after round. And you get him dropped, you get him hurt, and that doesn't really change the course of the fight. So, could Linares have got up? Probably. I think that he'd had enough, which is why he didn't get up, And if you want to call that a quit, that's up to your individual interpretations. But credit goes to Lomachenko. He's beaten a very good fighter in Jorge Linares for my money. Linares, no, he hasn't gone out and beaten consensus top pound for pound fighters, but he's consistently performed at the world level. He's beaten some good names, and you can see in his performances that he's got certain skills at an elite level. And for me, the size is a factor. So the fact that Lomachenko beats such a bigger man is something that I do give him props for. Let's put that fight to one side. Let's talk about Hughie Fury Sexton. So after the fight, I'm not going to go over the fight too much more because, as I say, covered that last night in an instant reaction video. But my brief take and interpretation of the post-fight comments, where Team Fury made pretty clear that they were probably looking to vacate the British title. Mick Hennessy, I think it was Mick Hennessy, said that guys like Joe Joyce and Daniel Dubois were novices compared to Hughie Fury, and that the plan is to get Hughie Fury another world title and step away from that British title scene, and therefore not to engage in fights with the likes of Joyce and Dubois. My take. So my initial take is disappointment for two reasons. One of them is selfish disappointment. I'd really like to see Hughie Fury Joe Joyce. I'd really like to see Hughie Fury Gorman. I'd really like to see Hughie Fury Dubois. So from a selfish perspective, I would prefer to see Hughie in against these domestic prospects we all know, as opposed to international competition who we maybe see less regularly. So there's an element of that. I just think some of the more interesting and intriguing fights are in that British domestic scene. So element of personal disappointment there. Also, ever so slightly, an element of being sceptical. You know, Hughie Fury is ahead of those guys professionally. He's had a lot more fights than them. You know, he's operated at world title level. He's already the British champion. He's already had a fight with Joseph Parker, which was a very competitive fight. So, in terms of where his career has progressed to, yes, he is ahead of them. I'm not saying he's better than them. I'm just saying he's more advanced down his career than them. And I wonder if they don't want to take the risk of someone like Joe Joyce, who's a 4-fight novice or whatever he is, given that they kind of view themselves as ahead of him in the timeline of a career. Because I think they view someone like Joe Joyce as a potential risk. And I do. I think someone like Joe Joyce, Hughie Fury is a clever, pretty, technical boxer. Joe Joyce is the opposite. He's the juggernaut, and that clash of styles could be very intriguing for boxing fans, but I think they view it as a risk. And I think we're more likely, unfortunately, to see Hughie Fury in against some number 15th ranked competitor in one of the governing bodies in some sort of eliminator. The difficulty I see with Hughie Fury is I think it's going to be quite hard for Hughie to get one of these world title shots. I do. He's a hard guy for a world champion to offer as a voluntary because his style is very difficult, he's very tricky, he doesn't always make for the most entertaining fights, and he's very, very good. So you're bringing in a guy who could potentially beat you, who's not going to sell a lot of tickets, who's not going to sell a lot of pay-per-views, and who's not potentially going to make for the most entertaining fight, but you've got a real risk of losing to him. And I'm not saying I pick Hughie to beat the reigning world champions, I'm just saying from a world champion perspective, there are better risk-reward fighters out there than Hughie Fury. I mean, let's say Derek Chisora, for example. Let's say Deontay Wilder had to fight either Chisora or Hughie Fury. Chisora is probably the better known. Chisora would probably make the most entertaining fight because he'd come forward and try and stick it on you. Chisora would probably throw a table at the press conference, which would sell a load of tickets and create interest in the fight, Whereas Hughie Fury is a guy who does fight negatively from time to time. If he were to beat you, it would be a disaster. If you were to beat him, you wouldn't get that much credit. He's coming off a fight with the likes of Sam Sexton. He got outpointed by 10 points on 2 of the judges' cards against Joseph Parker. My point is, from a risk-reward perspective, from a business perspective, I'm not sure these top guys are going to be offering Hughie Fury a world title shot. Hughie's also not with one of the promotional juggernauts. He's not with one of these promotional outfits who's going to get him mega exposure. Albeit, to be fair, he was on Channel 5 last night on terrestrial TV. But what I mean is, we'll have to see what kind of fights and what kind of budget is available to make the big Hughie Fury fights coming up. It's hard. A lot of those belts are very tied up at the minute. You look at people like Pulev, White, Dillian White, Kubrat Pulev, Luis Ortiz, Alexander Povetkin, all of these guys involved in like mandatory style situations, final eliminator style situations, all of these guys waiting in line, waiting in the queue. To be honest, Hughie Fury's place is probably behind those sort of guys, he's going to have to wait in line for a good while. And for me, I'd rather see him fighting someone like a Joe Joyce, from a selfish perspective, because I think it'd be interesting. I'd rather see him fight someone like a Joe Joyce in the interim, rather than fighting some, top 15 governing body rated fighter in some sort of eliminator, with the hope that you'll get a final eliminator in 2019 or 2020 and then a world title shot the year after. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm misjudging the situation. Maybe the team around him can get him a voluntary against Joshua or Wilder or something like that. But I don't see where that's going to come from. And as someone who's been a massive Hughie Fury fan throughout his career, if we're going to have to wait 3 or 4 years for another world title shot, I think there's a lot of money and a lot of intrigue and a lot of celebrity to be made out of those British fights. I really do. So I'd be disappointed not to see them, and it sounds like we're not going to. With Hughie Fury, for me, he's got all the skills. He's got all the refinement. He's got all the attributes. He's not the biggest puncher in the world. He's never going to be. Neither is Tyson, But he's got everything you need from a technical perspective, Hughie Fury. For me, what Hughie's going to need to do to get himself to world title level is his approach to the game. It's going to be the aggression. It's going to be throwing punches with bad intentions. It's going to be committing to punches rather than just flicking and flailing them out. It's going to be higher output. It's going to be coming forward and being on the front foot every so often. And we saw elements of that last night against Sam Sexton, particularly in the 4th and 5th rounds when Peter Fury told him to sit down with his punches a bit more. There's certainly those kind of elements in Hughie Fury's fight against Sam Sexton last night. My worry is that while Sam Sexton was the British champion, as I think I said in my post-fight reaction last night, British level, yes, okay, he's a British champion, but for me, lower British level. And Sexton is a guy who isn't the most formidable of tests you would see even at domestic level. And my concern is that it was the same old Hughie Fury for the first 3 rounds. Maybe that was the game plan, have a few rounds like that and then try and step on the gas. And if it was, fair enough. But I just worry that Hughie spends too long in fights, definitely in the Parker fight, probably even in last night's fight. Does he spend too long just in first gear? Is that will to go out there and destroy an opponent in him? You look at the way Joe Joyce approached the Lenroy Thomas fight. It's a lot less pretty than Hughie Fury's approach. But sometimes it can be effective. And the commentary team was saying last night, that was a close round. I wonder who that round went to. I gave the rounds to Hughie Fury as a matter of coincidence. But, a guy like Joe Joyce, he'd go out and throw 100 punches in the first round against Sam Sexton, probably stop him in a round. And, if not, the commentary team wouldn't be saying, give that one even. This is my concern with Hughie Fury as a long-time fan of his. I maintained the view that Hughie Fury beat Joseph Parker. I retained the view that Hughie Fury was the victim of bad scoring in that fight, especially the 118-110. Even if you're a ardent New Zealand Joseph Parker fan who thinks Parker won the fight, a lot of you would agree that Hughie Fury got the rough end of the scoring with that 118-110 times 2. But the thing is that whilst I don't think that scoring was justified, sometimes the style he approaches the game with kind of allows judges to score his fights in that fashion. You simply couldn't score a Joe Joyce fight in that fashion. Now, Hughie Fury's never going to be a Joe Joyce. They're absolute opposite ends of the scale in terms of their approach. But, I'm probably exaggerating to make the point. But you see what I mean? I just retained a concern that Hughie Fury spends too long in that first gear and could do a little bit more to commit. Now, granted, he turned it on rounds 4 and 5 and extinguished the threat of Sam Sexton within 2 rounds. So we should be very complimentary about the fact that he did that. Let's just hope that is the start of a new approach we see adopted in future Hughie Fury fights, and that he is aware he needs to spend less time in that gear 1 sparring mode. Anyway, that's my take. had a few more thoughts to get out about these two fights, so thought we'd do a little bit of a Sunday one. Thanks as ever for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the content.